This is from an individual going by the name of Eidos, who says, that thing with the immune system and social connections sounds implausible. Why should social bonding translate into biological effects? Even if it is true, it works quite reversed for me. Too many people and too many social networked dynamic hyperconnectivity makes me tired and fills me with a strong death wish. Seriously, I hate this argument. I heard it before, almost in the same way as here, but none provided yet a scientific explanation for it, nor for its obligatory universality. So this
Okay, this
not
is
not
a
the most
many.
grammatically sound question, but I think
No, but I like it. I think it's a good question. I think it's a very good question. But in reality, it's about a five-part question. So let's try to do it one part at a time, and let's see if I can remember all five parts. If not, I will prod you to help me. But okay, part number one: is it true that when we feel plugged into a group, when we feel that other people want, love us, and need us and admire us, that our immune system goes into overdrive and that our cognitive system goes into overdrive and that we are far more capable of warding off illness, we're far healthier, we stand up straighter, you can see a glow in our skin, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, is it true that these social factors have an impact on our biology? Yes. There's a field called psychoneuroimmunology. Hundreds of thousands of studies have been done in psychoneuroimmunology, and it's a field. Basically every study in psychoneuroimmunology demonstrates exactly what I've just said. Have a sense of connection. Have a sense that other people need you. Have a sense that other people love you. Have a sense that other people look up to you. Have a sense that other people would be profoundly hurt if you were gone, and it does all kinds of things for your health, your mind, your brain. Okay, so is it a fact? Yes. Please look up psychoneuroimmunology. Just Google it. Better yet, go to Google Scholar so that you can, bypass all of the fluffy stuff, all of the stuff that really isn't science, and go directly to that which is science and look up psychoneuroimmunology, and you will get an awful lot of results. Okay, if it's true, and it is, then why is it true? Well, that's where my hypothesis comes in. I mean, I started writing journal articles and stuff like that about this. My first scientific presentation on this subject was in something like 1995, a long time ago. But my hypothesis may or may not be correct, and the hypothesis is this: if you take a bunch of supercomputers and you pit them up against each other, the smartest supercomputer is going to win, right?
yeah, I guess so.
I mean, it sounds logical. Well, basically, this is a planet of supercomputers. What is a supercomputer? Supercomputer these days is a massively parallel processed computer. Now, what is a massively parallel processed computer? It's a computer that doesn't just have one microchip handling things. It doesn't just have one central parallel or central processing unit. It has 100 central processing units, 1,000 central processing units. There's a guy named Dharma Mohendran at IBM's Almaden Research Lab, and he and I participated in he was brought to a forum that was done in honor of my second book a couple of months ago. And Dharma Mohendran is working with a little supercomputer called Deep Blue Genes. And Deep Blue Genes has, and my number is off by 100 or 200, but it's roughly 147,452 processing units, central processing units, all working in parallel. Now, how in the world does that relate to our physical health, our biology, and our social connection? First of all, in a society, if you're together with 100 people in a joint project of some kind, you are a joint brain of 100 people. The collective intelligence of your group is going to determine who wins, the same way that the collective skill of a football team determines who wins, not the skill of just one football player. I mean, in football, you've got 11 guys against 11 guys. My iTunes has just done something flaky. Steve Jobs has just tried to take over my entire computer. Okay, now we're back to TJ. Okay, now back to this.
Back to me for a brief chuckle.
Yes, right. And I mean, you're in a country called the United States. It has about 325 million citizens, and it's up against China. It's been up against Russia in the past. It has been up against Japan in the 1980s, and it's racing to a certain extent with South Korea. Plus, it's racing with another unit called BRIC. That's Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and it is in a race with the European Union. Now, which do you think is going to win? The society with the greatest collective smarts or the society with the least collective smarts?
Greatest. I'm going to go with
Well, I
that.
would think so. I would think so too. Now, how in the world do you get collective smarts? Well, we get a hint about this from computers. In computers, the best learning machines are learning machines that work according to a very simple rule. You do what's called an iteration, the equivalent of one generation, and you see, and you've got a problem, and all of the elements in your machine, all 147,000 of Dharma Mahendra's central processing units, are in this to see who can get the best handle on the problem. Well, little groups of processors that manage to get together and put together an idea of how to handle the problem that are doing reasonably well, those are given, you give them additional resources, you give them additional attention. And in the next generation, you cull out the ones that just don't seem to have a clue. And you do this generation after generation after generation after generation, the equivalent of minute after minute after minute and day after day after day in human time. And what happens? The machines that work according to this rule of cut out those that aren't making it and focus your attention and focus your resources on those that are making it win. They win. They learn the fastest. That's how a learning machine works. Well, guess what? A human society is a learning machine. And when America goes up against Russia, and eventually in 1989, Russia loses and gives up entirely, and the entire Soviet Union dissolves, the stakes are very high. The effect on biology is very, very profound because in America, the average age is approximately, I mean, the average age at which we die is approximately 78. In other words, we live to approximately the age of 78. Guess what age they were living or they were dying at in Russia? Guess how many years of life expectancy you had in Russia during those years in which the Soviet Union was trying and failing to beat us?
53 and a half.
In the right range, 59. In other words, in the United States, we were living 19 years longer. Well, that's a lifetime back in the early days of humanity, an entire lifetime, an extra 20 years. So you ask me if something social has an impact on our biology and what in the world could possibly be the proof of it. That is one proof of it. In a successful society where the units are working together, where the society itself is winning in the game against other societies. Now
I
remember,
think
winning, yeah,
I hate to interrupt you here, but I think
okay.
what people like Eidos and other people who've asked similar questions, I think their problem with this is that they feel like this somehow doesn't apply to them personally. So what is
And here's why it doesn't. Because I've read Ido's question over about 3 times. I think it was a very good one. And it goes back to any good thing in overdose is a poison.
mhm.
Too much sociality can be really damaging. It can be really damaging. Now, look, there's a difference between Idos's life and mine. I'm a writer and I'm an intellectual, and that means every day I have to carve out a space for myself in this world. There is no structure to my life. I have to make my structure myself. There is no social scheme in my life. There's no group of people I have to go and hang out with every day. I get to choose who I'm hanging out with. So for me, social connection is a treat. But if Eidos has to get up every morning and go to a job and be surrounded by people he'd rather not be with, and then comes home and is in a family situation where he's surrounded with people that he's not that he doesn't like to be with, and where he doesn't get enough attention. You know, where there are so many people around him competing for attention that they swallow all the oxygen and there's no space left for him, then having people around is not connection of the kind we're talking about. Remember, we're talking about connection where people love having you there, where they would miss you if you were gone, where they look up to you and admire you. Well, when you're in your job, you're just another part of an anonymous mass. And you're stuck together with people who don't necessarily care about you and would rather pay attention to somebody else. And when everybody collects at the water cooler at coffee break time, the last person they talk to sometimes is you. And that's hurtful. That is really, and that is not having other people in your lives in the sense that we're talking about it. So too much, there's a computer, there is a computer thing, cellular automata it's called the game of life. And it is so lifelike that it's ridiculous. It works like this. Imagine a chessboard, but with opaque panels, right?
Mhm.
And it's all white panels. And under every panel there's a little light. And the light can be on or the light can be off. In other words, any panel can be lit or it can go dark. And being lit is the equivalent of living, and going dark is the equivalent of dying. Now, TJ, you're one of those chess squares, those chessboard squares, and I'm another one of those chessboard squares. And the guy who wrote in about too much sociality is another one of those chessboard squares, and we all operate according to a very simple rule, and the rule is this: no company, you die, meaning your light goes out. Company, you live. In other words, if you've got another square around us that's lit, or a couple of squares around us that's lit, we light up. But too much company and you die. You know, when you're a square, you have four squares, one square to your right, one square to your left, one square above you, one square below you, and then there are the squares whose corners meet yours. So I guess that's something like 8 squares.
Yeah,
And if all 8 squares are filled, there's no oxygen left for you to breathe, and you die. Now, this is an artificial game, but it's very similar to real life because it follows the rule of any good thing in excess is poison.
makes sense to me. But then again, I'm not Eidos, so I can't answer.
Well, I hope. I mean, I think he's asked a very, very valid question. I think he's asked a question based
It
on the
was
empirical evidence of his own life.
yeah, his question is actually kind of similar to the one that I had when I was first reading the Lucifer Principle back in.
Oh, what was that?
Oh, well, it was basically essentially the same thing. I was just wondering why some of the rules that you were talking about didn't seem to apply neatly to my own life, but
Well, think
I
of
think
this for a
I wasn't
second. Well,
take
let's.
I wasn't
Well,
taking as I wasn't as nuanced in my thinking as I am now. So
think of what Einstein would call a Gedanke experiment, a thought experiment. Okay.
hmm
And it's really very simple and very non-Einsteinian. Imagine one of your family reunions,
dear God,
and
no.
where 30 people show up. Now imagine that you go to that family reunion and nobody pays any attention to you. How do you feel?
Well, with my family, I'd feel pretty good if they weren't paying
Oh,
attention to
Lord. Okay.
me.
But now let's imagine the family, or let's change it to a reunion of your high school class,
hmm
and nobody pays any attention to you. How do you feel?
Once again, I'm pretty much fine with that.
Okay. Oh well. But at any well, it's a thought experiment. So it's the thought that counts. But imagine that you
Okay,
have just
I'll
done something
imagine that I'm a normal person and that I would feel bad in that situation.
right, and imagine that you go to either a high school reunion or a reunion of family, and you have just made headlines for an astonishing accomplishment. You've just cured cancer,
Yeah.
and everybody pays attention to nobody but you, and everybody wants to introduce you to everybody that they know. How do you feel?
I guess I'd feel pretty good.
Yeah, well, that's what happens. Sociality is not just sociality. Sociality is measured by the extent to which other people value us.
hmm
And we get a boost when other people value us. And we get a boost, we get the opposite. We get a poison when other people think that we're dirt.
Well, what about those people who they kind of take it as a challenge? They get treated like dirt, and then they kind of take it as a personal challenge to I don't know, sort of rebel against the people who treated them that way and carve out their own niche in the world.
I think that's extremely valuable, and it goes to the flamers. We at the end of our question list for tonight, we had two flamers, and
Yeah.
frankly, one of the most valuable things in life, just the way that pain in a moderate dose is a very important thing, insecurity in a moderate dose is a very important thing, rebellion is an extraordinarily important thing. And one of the things that happens to us is that we set ourselves apart from others in order to get the kind of positive attention that I'm talking about. It's basically like this. Oh, they're not going to pay attention for me for being good, then they'll pay attention for me for being bad. But it produces some of the most positive things in life because look, I'm a total outsider, and TJ, you're not exactly normal, right? Although you may be more normal than I think. Who knows? I mean, how did I know?
I'm probably less normal than you think, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
So
I don't know what you think about my normality, so.
yeah. Well, I would imagine. I mean, just I would imagine that most of the people who are watching these YouTube things are like you and me, and they don't feel terribly normal at all.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
certainly don't feel terribly normal. Well, being excluded from normal society just about all of my life has done incredibly valuable things. It's made me carve out territory of my own. And why? Because carving out territory of my own was my own way, my only possible way of getting attention. But once upon a time, there was a whole series of journal articles on the fact that, well, back in the 1960s, we became obsessed in America with self-image. And I was doing research at the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers University. I was not supposed to be doing it. I was much too young. I hadn't even finished my freshman year of college. But the fact is, I saw this horrible thing going on around me, something it looked to me like it was going to destroy the American educational system. And that is that all of the people who were being so good to me, all of the professors in the Graduate School of Education and the head of the Graduate School of Education were obsessed with self-image. And they felt that the goal of education was not to put facts in kids' heads. In fact, in the essays they wrote, in the articles they published, and in the textbooks that they wrote, it said our job in education is not to put facts in kids' heads. Facts are not what counts. What counts is self-image. What counts is self-confidence. The result is that for 50 years, teachers have been trying to put self-confidence into our brains and a positive self-image into our brains without facts, without any knowledge. And it can be a big mistake to have self-confidence if you don't know a damned thing. In fact, there were a bunch of studies back in the 1990s in the leading journal of cross-cultural studies, and they indicated something that my friends back at the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers University would have found absolutely tragic and deplorable. And that is that the kids in China, Korea, and Japan had miserable, terrible self-images and very, very low self-confidence, while American kids had self-confidence and self-image up the kazoo.
Mm-hmm.
They were very, very confident of their abilities. Now, what has happened in the last 20 years, TJ, and the years in which the Koreans, the Japanese, and the Chinese have had a terrible self-image, and we have had a puffed-up self-image, what has happened to the relative test scores on things like mathematics and science of the kids in South Korea, China, Japan, and the United States?
They've done pretty well, and we've done remarkably shitty.
That's right, and that demonstrates the value of insecurity.
Well, that brings me
Because
to the Dunning-Kruger effect too,
the Dunning-Kruger effect. Okay, I'm all
because
for it. I'm all ears.
the Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias in which an unskilled person makes poor decisions and reaches erroneous conclusions, but their incompetence denies them the metacognitive ability to realize their mistakes. The unskilled therefore suffer from illusory superiority, rating their own ability as far above average, much higher than it actually is, while the highly skilled underrate their abilities, suffering from illusory inferiority.
You've got it, and that is one of the major reasons that the South Koreans, the Chinese, and the Japanese have done so much better than we've done in education in the last 20 years or more. It's because they don't feel that great about themselves. When they go home at night and all they've gotten are B pluses on their tests, they feel absolutely miserable. They beat themselves up. As a matter of fact, a small number of them actually kill themselves, especially in Japan. Not that I'm recommending killing yourself if you only get a B plus. Kids, do not try this at home. But at any rate, the point is that these kids flagellate themselves so badly that they work harder and harder and harder until they get A's. And then, of course, they feel absolutely miserable and like total dunderheads because all they've gotten is A's. So they flagellate themselves, they go home, and they work even harder, and they get A pluses. Meanwhile, we get C's, and we come home and say, "Look, Ma, I got the highest score in the class." And now there's an old Bloomism. Once upon a time when I was a child, I used to read George Bernard Shaw. And George Bernard Shaw is a brilliant writer. If any of us who write for a living and who write for more than a living, we write because we love to write. But if any of us who write because we love to write have ever managed to live up to the level of George Bernard Shaw, we will be extremely lucky. George Bernard Shaw was an expert in something called aphorisms, short, pithy sayings that got it all. Like he was the one who came up with the phrase, some people dream of things that are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. That was a line that became famous in the Kennedy administration. And it was a terrific line, but George Bernard Shaw wrote it. So I started to write aphorisms in the hope that I could someday come somewhere close to George Bernard Shaw, which of course is absolutely impossible, especially if you have a reasonable degree of insecurity.
Yeah, plus I haven't seen these aphorisms, so.
Yeah, right.
Where's the Bloom collection of aphorisms?
Oh, it's 172 pages or something like that. It's sitting in the Bloom computer. But
Publish that shit.
One of them is you can tell an intelligent person by the number of things he knows he doesn't know.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, a really intelligent person thinks he's an absolute dolt. There are at least 1,000 things that he wants to know before he will consider himself even reasonably intelligent. And a person who is an absolute dolt is absolutely sure he knows everything. And the result is that the person who's absolutely sure he knows everything will never learn a damn thing because he doesn't need to learn anything. He already knows everything.
This is called the Sarah Palin effect.
Oh, the Sarah Palin effect. Now that's a very interesting one. And now, what was the name of this? The Dunning-Kruger effect?
Dunning.
The Dunning-Kruger effect. Well,
Yeah.
it's very, very interesting. And if you ever get a chance to send me the link, send it to me, the URL, because you're right. We are all omniscient in the age of Wikipedia. It's just that Wikipedia, for those of us who are really curious, shows us how much we don't know. How much we'd love to know, but don't have a chance to.
I love Wikipedia so much.
Did we talk last week about Hansen's illness and the desirability of pain?
No.
Okay, look, I'm not a masochist. Okay, what I'm about to say is not meant to tell you that you should be flagellating yourself with a cat of nine tails at least 1,700 times a day. Okay, but the fact is that we humans need pain. We need some of the negative things in life. We need boredom. And what is the proof of that? Let's go back to pain for a minute. We'll skip over boredom, which is itself an incredible pain.
Probably the worst.
Hansen's disease is a disease that numbs you to pain. And the result is, you and I, when we don't even notice when we run into a piece of furniture, because we do it an awful lot. Our hands nip the furniture an awful lot. And when we are in foot traffic and going in the opposite direction from another person, we avoid colliding with that other person like crazy. Have you ever had that experience where one day you really trip up and you end up just nicking the shoulder of another person? And you think that other person's going slow. I mean, what do humans walk? 2.5 to 3 miles an hour? And you're doing 2.5 to 3 miles an hour, so your relative speed is 6 miles an hour? I mean, come on. There are turtles that can do faster than 6 miles an hour. So you would think that it would create absolutely no pain whatsoever. And yet, when you do accidentally nick that other person, when your hand collides with his, or when your shoulder collides with his, it hurts. Thank God it hurts, because people with Hansen's disease don't feel all those little bumps against other people. They don't feel all those little times when their knuckles collide with a piece of furniture while they're walking through a room. And the result is, guess what happens to them? Their fingers fall off. Their hands fall off. One of the first things that falls off, and God knows what we bump with our noses, but one of the first things that falls off is their noses.
I don't
And
know why that's funny to me. It really shouldn't be.
well, Hansen's disease is better known as leprosy. And in the old days, the sight of people without noses and fingers was so loathsome and appalling to people. I mean, it makes you sick when you see a very, very abnormal human being. It really does, whether you want to be sick or not. Whether you want to be sympathetic and compassionate or not, it still makes you sick. And as a consequence, all the lepers were taken and collected and thrown someplace where no one would ever have to see them, and those were called leper colonies. And those lepers got to be that way simply because they didn't have pain. So pain is an incredibly valuable experience. Now remember, there's another Bloomism, another aphorism from my feeble attempts to come anywhere near George Bernard Shaw. And it is that any good thing in excess is a poison. I think we've mentioned that before. Paracelsus came up with a version of it. I mean, Paracelsus, who was basically an alchemist and chemist before there was any chemistry, and a doctor before modern medicine was invented. This is in the 1500s. Paracelsus had an incredible realization. You could take just about any poison on the planet, and if you watered it down to the right dosage, it could become a medicine. Well, the Bloomism is the opposite of that. Any good thing in excess is a poison. But the basic message behind those two is what another thinker, and it wasn't Aristotle, called the Golden Rule, because I was a Roman thinker, but Aristotle called it the mean. In other words, you want to be in the middle with things, with many things. Now, look, when it comes to points of view, and when it comes to having emotions about points of view, then it's time to be a little bit excessive. And you and I are both excessive about those kinds of things. But you want to be in the middle. So you want to have a certain amount of insecurity so that you are driven to do better. And you want to have a certain amount of contentment. It's a continuum. And it's a continuum between panic and pleasure. And when it comes to boredom, now back in the 19th century, you remember there was a poet in France named Baudelaire, along with his friends Rimbaud and a few others. These were the pre-French surrealist, and I'm sure I've got some of this wrong, and I know that we have some flamers who will gladly point out my errors, but I'm off
Yeah,
by
there's
a
no shortage of those on the internet.
yeah, but back in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, and 1880s, Baudelaire was one of the greatest poets France has ever produced. And the major subject of his poetry was the extraordinary pain of boredom. And a wise man of my acquaintance named T.J. Kincaid, otherwise known as the Amazing Atheist, once said only a few minutes ago, pain is possibly the greatest, or boredom is possibly the greatest pain of them all. And you're right. And guess what it drives us to do? It drives us to seek out novelty. It drives us to seek out the new. And here we are, pulsating parts, neurons of a global brain, neurons of a collective intelligence. And what does pain and agony, and especially the agony of boredom and insecurity, do for us? It drives us to exceed the limits in just small ways. It drives us to excel in just small ways, and it drives us to seek out things that are utterly new. When I look, I think TJ is absolutely incredible. He sends me emails that you guys don't get to see, and he has an insight that is spectacular, and he is able to express it in a very minimum number of words, but he's able to express it with absolute clarity, and that is a stunning ability. So when I accuse poor TJ of being extraordinarily smart and extraordinarily insightful, he cringes because TJ doesn't think of himself as extraordinarily smart. He thinks of himself as dumb as a duffel bag. And when TJ accuses me of being reasonably intelligent, I cringe because I think of myself as being even dumber than a duffel bag, dumber than a lock on the duffel bag, for God's sakes. A lock that you've lost a combination lock that you've utterly lost the combination to and will never recover again. That's how dumb I feel. But there is a certain value to us feeling dumb as shit, if you'll excuse, on a family-rated program like
Hey,
ours.
this is far from family rated, so.
Yes, right. Herbert Spencer, a thinker of the 1890s, who was one of the most famous thinkers of his time, now one of the most despised, and he shouldn't be despised at all. He had some very valuable thoughts. But he basically said you start with an undifferentiated unity of you're building a universe, and then you divide. Just the way that a cell starts out with an undifferentiated cell, and then it differentiates. It divides and divides and divides. Well, that dividing is one of those valuable things that could possibly exist. It's the essence of cosmic creativity. It's how the cosmos goes about creating things. And divisions between people are extremely valuable. Now, did I ever tell you the Frank Soloway story?
No.
The story of the siblings? Okay, Frank Soloway had this theory that I thought was absolute garbage. Frank Soloway came out with this in the 1990s. He had studied the relationships between brothers and sisters. And he had come to the conclusion that the first kid that two parents have turns out to be the good kid. And he turns out to be the good kid because doing everything exactly the way his parents want gets him lots of attention. After all, who else is there to get attention aside from the dog and the cat? It's
Mm-hmm.
the dog and the cat and him. And he's a lot better at following orders than they are and doing the right thing, doing the thing that everybody approves of, that his mother and father approve of. Kid number two comes along, and the good kid slot has been taken. If he tries to compete for the good kid slot, there's no way he's ever going to be number one. There's no way he's ever going to get the kind of attention that he really wants. So, what slot do you think he chooses?
The opposite. He has
That's
to
right. He
he has to
chooses
be
the
the
bad.
bad kid.
You got it. That's exactly what Frank Soloway said. And I thought it was horsepucky because I'm the first kid in the family, and there was never anything good about me. And my brother was the second kid in the family, and my brother was the good kid. And then I realized that because my parents were away, it was World War II when I was growing up, the first 3 years of my life, and my mother was taking care of my father's store, and my father was off in the Navy. I didn't have any parents. And the first kid they actually got to have together as a family was my brother. So, for all practical purposes, chronologically, hey, yeah, I was the number one kid. But I fell into the same slot that Frank Soloway's number two kid fell into. And now, does this do anything of value for society? You bet your bottom dollar it does. Because if the members of a family each spread out to find a different slot in attention space, a different way of getting the attention of their parents, and then a different way of getting the attention of friends, just the way that twins, identical twins, will actually differentiate themselves so that each one gets some attention. Well, that spreading out in order to get people's attention spreads us out the way you spread your fingers out when you're running your fingers through the carpet to find that goddamn contact lens that fell out of your eye. Did you ever have that experience?
I can't have
And,
things touching my eye, so.
Okay. Well, it's very hard to find those contact lenses, and you spread your fingers out as far as you can. Or when a kid gets lost in a cornfield, the corn can be 6 feet high, and a 2.5 foot tall child can get lost. You send out a search party. It's called a dragnet. You get guys to spread their arms out and stay just far enough apart so only their fingers touch, and then you get them to walk down the length of the field where the kid is lost, and then walk another length of the field. And the fact that they're all spread out makes them an effective search engine. And it's by forcing us to spread out to get a different niches in the attention of our parents and the people around us, that society ends up differentiating enough to produce incredibly fabulous things.
This is a question from Kadoosh, which maybe is not the best online handle, but you, along with many of the other greatest thinkers ever, Howard, have
Now,
been
not that I'm exactly one of the greatest thinkers ever, but at any rate, okay, well, all right.
or at least the critics of established religion. My mother, a Muslim, says that this is because thinkers like you have been trained to look at facts and logic and thus do not have any spirituality. Do you have spirituality of any kind? Is it necessary to have religious beliefs in one's life?
I've been spending the whole day with this today because I've been spending the day with an essay by Stuart Kauffman. I'm tracking down this question of who asked the question of how the cosmos creates. And it sort of vaguely comes up in Stuart Kauffman. Now, Stuart Kauffman is one of the great thinkers on complexity and self-organization and things of that sort for the last 20 years. He's been at the Santa Fe Institute. Now he's at the University, I believe, of Calgary. He's in Canada. But Stuart Kauffman is a terrific thinker about this stuff, and Stuart is asking this question. And basically, it's coming up because, among other things, Richard Dawkins has written a book in which he says that everything wrong with the world is wrong because of religion. And Christopher Hitchens has written the same book in slightly different words. And Sam Harris has written the same thing in slightly different words. And I believe Daniel Dennett has thrown in his 2 cents. And all these guys are radically against religion. And whereas there is a small group of people, which includes Paul Davies and Stuart Kauffman, and I guess you could include me, who believe that religion's an incredibly important thing and you shouldn't be dissing it. I mean, once upon a time, the Foundation for the Future in Seattle decided to they throw these little tiny symposia, and they bring together the 8 to 10 leading experts on a subject in the world. And they don't even have much of an audience. They have an audience of a maximum of 10 people to watch these. And they decided to do one while I was sick in bed back in the 1990s, with the 8 greatest experts on cultural evolution. And they called me and said, look, I didn't believe this when they called me, but at any rate, they called me and said, you're one of the leading 8 thinkers on cultural evolution on the planet, and we want to have you out in Seattle at this event, and we'll introduce you to some amazing people, and we'll put you in a very good hotel, and we will fly you out first class and all of that. Well, I'm stuck in a bed, TJ. I can't get anywhere. I mean, getting to my bathroom is a difficult matter, to say the least. So they were very, very kind, and they set me up. They said, "Have you got a speakerphone?" With the phone, I was talking to them when I was a speakerphone. So they said, "Fine, we'll have you on by speakerphone." TJ, can you believe this? I'm laying there in a bed. They don't have to be that kind to me. And nobody, when you're in a bed, nobody pays any attention to. It's the rule of the learning machine. Um, Shuttle resources and influence to those parts that are working and keep resources and influence away from the parts that aren't. Well, I was a part that wasn't. I was dying of isolation. So I was extremely grateful to these people. So they had me in a room with people like Peter Richardson, who is one of the smartest people on the planet. Peter is one of the experts on cultural evolution. You can look up his books, and he is just phenomenal, an incredible brain. Susan Blakemore, who is a student of Richard Dawkins and has carried on the idea of memetics, memes, from Richard, and a bunch of people like that. And then one poor guy in the room, named, oh my God, what is his name? He's a friend of mine. Oh, Munawar Anis. I wasn't a friend then. I had never met him before. Well, Anis is listed as one of the 100 great intellectuals of the world in the UNESCO listing of this kind of thing, and is the founder of 2 of the leading journals on Islamic studies in the Islamic world, and was the Minister of Education in Malaysia, and all kinds of things like this. And during 3 solid days of discussion, every time Anis tried to bring up religion, everybody else in the room stomped on him, with the exception of me. I kept trying to save him. I kept trying to tell this room, this is an important subject. How can you possibly do this kind of thing? Religion is important. I believe in the importance of spirituality. When I go on the radio now, look, my flamers are going to vomit at this. But when I go, when I do Coast to Coast, which is the radio show I've done most often, I've done it 49 times, the calls that please me the most are the calls from the listeners, are the ones that say, Howard, you say you're an atheist, but you're the most spiritual person I've ever heard in my life. How can you possibly say that? Spirituality means a great deal to me, but you don't have to be religious to be spiritual. You don't have to believe that there is a God to be spiritual. One of the main points that Stuart Kauffman was making in his essay was if you just look at all the things we don't know, at all the mysteries that we haven't solved yet, they are so astonishing. They are so utterly awesome that they create in you the same kind of amazement at the divine that we think of as divinity. And those are the things that we should be worshiping. And guess what? I don't know if he knew this. I don't think he did because he didn't refer to Herbert Spencer, but Herbert Spencer came to exactly the same conclusion 110 years earlier. The conclusion was that there is so much that we don't know, and this frigging universe is so utterly astonishing in what it does, the way it does it, and the very few things we do know about it, and the so many things that we know we don't know and don't have a way of figuring out a way to know yet, that awe alone should stand us in lieu of a God. In fact, that awe alone is something that we and those who believe in God can all share. This was an argument 110 years ago with Herbert Spencer, and it was an argument in the last 2 years with Stuart Kauffman. And I believe in it. I think this is a place that utterly floors me. And one of the reasons, this is going to sound like really coming out of left field, but one of the reasons that of all the people that I worked with during my 15 years of field work in the music industry, the person that I loved the most, the person that I admired the most, the person who knit his way into the fabric of my being the most, and in a totally unexpected way, I never anticipated this, TJ, was Michael Jackson. And it was Michael Jackson because Michael Jackson had a quality of astonishment, awe, and wonder that was beyond anything I had ever seen in a human being before, and anything I've ever seen in a human being since. Is that quality of awe and wonder spiritual? Well, I suspect it is. Stuart Kauffman swears it is. And it means that when somebody has an ecstatic experience in the context of religion, that experience is for real. Our first questioner didn't believe that being needed, wanted, and loved and admired in a social context could possibly do anything for biology, but 40 years of research in psychoneuroimmunology said he was wrong. Well, in the same way, hundreds of thousands of years of human experience and pre-human experience in the awe of what we call the divine indicates there's something there. The feeling is there. It exists. And one way or the other, those of us in science have to acknowledge that it exists and come to figure out where it fits into this universe. So I respect the spiritual tremendously. And if I didn't have it in my life, I would feel bereft.
Well, I mean, I think that, and I mean, I don't know if you've read either of Sam Harris's books. I think he actually might have a third one out right now. But I think that his criticism there is that there is, in fact, this this great awe and this realm of human experience that is concerned with what we could call spirituality and these transcendental feelings, but religion offers people quick, easy, fast food solutions to why they feel this way. Oh, that's Jesus, or that's Krishna, or insert God here. So in other words, I think his criticism there is that religion actually cheapens those experiences.
Well, it's an interesting idea, but I think that there are some people who, whether they're atheists or religious, doesn't matter what they are, who cheapen their experiences. It goes back to the conversation we were having about the essential nature of insecurity. Some people, and you said it, and I said it. We both said it in different words. That the people who really learn the least are the people who think they know the most. And you can have people who use religion in that kind of stupid way too. But then you've got Reinhold Niebuhr, and you've got Martin Buber, and you've got all these, and St. Thomas Aquinas, and St. Augustine, and all the. I mean, St. Augustine was an absolutely terrific thinker, and he didn't make anything easy on himself. I don't know the works of Aquinas, but I would suspect he didn't make anything easy on himself either. In Stuart Kaufman's work, he quotes a long poem from John Donne, and John Donne at the time was a cleric. He was in the church. You know, John Donne was one of the greats of English literature, one of the greats of English poetry, and he was writing in the roughly 1600. And John Donne is just driven nuts by all kinds of religious grief. It isn't easy being religious. One of the great religious poets was the guy who wrote Pied Beauty. Oh God, what's his name again? He used to go through The Dark Night of the Soul all the time. But he was just this absolutely incredible poet, and all of his poetry is about his anxieties and woes and depressions and trying to figure out this God thing, for God's sakes. So for people who have an adequate degree of insecurity or an adequate degree of restlessness and an adequate degree of curiosity, there is no easy answer in religion. But for people who are going to take anything as an easy answer, yeah, there's an easy answer in religion, or there's an easy answer in science, or there's an easy answer in simply being self-satisfied all the time and smug and complacent, which is what another one of our questions is all about.
So this is another one of those instances where the Shakespeare quote about the fault lying not in the stars but in ourselves kind of comes into play.
Oh, excellent, superb, excellent, yes. And it's also another one where any good thing in excess is a poison. Comes
Let's
into play.
I'm gonna totally shift gears into something that's not even vaguely related, but I'm actually kind of interested in to hear your response to this, because my own position on this has changed a lot over the years. But this is by a user by the name of Hungador, which I don't know what that means.
Okay.
This may not
carp-
be the most complex question, but I would like to hear your response. Why are people so fascinated with video games? Just wondering if you
Oh,
have some interesting answer like you do for everything else.
that is a great question. That is, I mean, first of all, what's the obligation of science? Second rule of science, look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. So, in other words, look at the things that we take for granted and we don't think are important because they probably have some of the most important answers of them all. And that applies to just about anything that's under your nose, but video games is very much one of them. And I spent an awful lot of time thinking about video games, and it goes back to the collective smarts of a group in a sense. And it goes back to restlessness. We need two things in combination with each other. And they seem to be opposites. But again, there's another Bloomism, and that is opposites are joined at the hip. And that is we need a certain sense of defined structure, but if we have too much defined structure, it'll drive us batty. It'll produce boredom out the kazoo. And within that sense of defined structure, we need novelty. Now, how are games arranged? And I don't care whether it's a video game or a Monopoly game or sports or whatever. There's a set of rules. And the game starts at a certain point, and it ends at a certain point, and you know what you're supposed to be doing in the middle. Well, is real life very much like that? No, very often real life isn't like that. So it's a nice contained set of rules. It satisfies your pattern recognition sensibilities. It's all nice and contained. But of course, when something is too contained, then you need the element of surprise. And the element of surprise is built into every game. Somehow you just seem to be on the brink of somehow accomplishing something that just keeps slipping out of your grasp, and yet it seems possible to get it if you just stick with it long enough. And some people will stick with it for 16 hours straight until their eyes are crossed. But now, what is there to video games beyond just exercising our need for pattern recognition and our need for novelty? There's an awful lot more. How do I put this? Okay, Stephen Johnson. Stephen Johnson is one of the best science writers of our time. And Stephen Johnson wrote a book that didn't seem to be his best-selling book by any stretch of the imagination, but should have been, and it was called Everything Bad is Good for You. And he was defending the role of video games and television in expanding the human mind. And he said that if you look at television shows from the 1950s, you'll see that they carry one major plot line and one tiny little subplot that's just there for a little comic relief. But if you look at the television shows of the 1990s and the 2000s, shows like Lost, they have 32 plot lines running simultaneously. And
Yeah.
some of and Lost, you have to get the whole series of shows and watch it 16 times to even detect the existence of some of the plot lines.
Hold
Um,
that thought for a second, because I remember you actually used this at some point in The Genius of the Beast, and it's something similar to something that I'd been saying for quite some time, and I kind of started, parroting that to my friends, and using that as a defense of television and popular culture and stuff, which I'm often doing, much to the chagrin of the stuffier intellectual types that I know. Um, and man, there's just nothing that I've ever said to people. Well, that's not true, but very few things I've ever said to people have infuriated more of my friends than this idea that television has gotten more complex, or actually maybe made us smarter, or even the idea that humanity is getting smarter, because everyone I know thinks that we're just getting dumber and dumber and dumber, and I just don't understand how anyone could look at the evidence and think
okay,
that's the
now
case.
here's something that may help you out of this dilemma. Simply look up the Flynn effect on Google. In
Yeah.
fact, punch in the Flynn effect and Scientific American,
Hmm.
and you will get the articles on the Flynn effect. Now, the Flynn effect works like this, and this was the brilliant part of Stephen Johnson's book, although it turned out that actually the whole brilliant part that I was ascribing to Stephen Johnson came from a book by Flynn on the Flynn effect. But at any rate, this guy named Flynn, well, every once in a while, IQ scores, about once every 10 years, IQ scores have to be renormalized. IQ scores are set up so that the average IQ is 100.
Yeah.
But there is a problem. Every 10 years or so, the IQ tends to wander. The actual average of people taking the test isn't 100 anymore. It's 103 or 105 or 110. Well, because normal has to be 100, you have to renormalize the tests so that when you give them to 100,000 people, the average still falls at 100. Otherwise, the test is failing. Otherwise, what it means to have an IQ of 110, an above average IQ, doesn't count anymore because it's not above average anymore. Okay, so this guy named Flynn was one of those myriad people hired, a small army of ant-like people, hired to renormalize the IQ tests. And this has been going on for about 60 years. And suddenly Flynn had an insight. It occurred to him that the IQ tests had to be renormalized every 10 years because back in 1950, the average was 100, but using the very same tests in 1960, the average was 106. And then they had to be renormalized again because once you renormalize them and the average in 1960 was 100 again, by 1970 the average was 106. And he realized that every 10 years it's going up roughly 6 points. Now, in some places like Africa, it was only going up when he really, really looked at this very carefully and did all the statistics, and it took a long time. In places like Africa, the IQ was only going up by something like 3 points a decade. But in places like Holland, it was going up 9 points a decade, and in the United States, it was going up 7 points a decade. Now, since Flynn took figures from the 1950s on up to 2000, imagine how many IQ points people had increased in that time. 35 points, roughly. 35 points? Well, 135 on an IQ score is very, very close to genius. In other words, the average person of 2010 is 35 IQ points smarter than the average person of 1950, roughly. And we think we are getting dumber. Now, it's true we are getting more complacent. And it is true that thanks to friends like those I had who took very good care of me at the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers University, the professors there, we've been pumping a decreasing number of facts into kids' brains in the educational system. But guess what? Kids have iPhones. Kids are about to get 4.3-inch screen phones with Android. kids are using their Google all the time. They may not be getting an awful lot of facts in school, but they're pouring their facts into their brain on a voluntary basis. I mean, just go to a subway platform or a bus station someplace and watch what people are doing while they are waiting for the bus or the train. They are twiddling, fiddling, and canoodling with with their iPhones or even with their cheap little old Nokias and Motorola's. And they are going online and they are seeking out information. And when they're not seeking out information, they're seeking social connection. And social connection constantly gives you new information because if your friends repeated exactly the same words to you every day, you'd get bored with them very quickly and find new friends. So we have become information processors of a kind that nobody could have imagined in 1950 or 1960. We are getting smarter. The world is getting smarter. It isn't just us. Do we still have to race against the Chinese and race very, very, very hard to stay ahead? You bet. But in part, we have to race very hard because everybody's getting somewhere between 25 and 35 points smarter every 50 years. That's the Flynn effect. That's what's brought out so brilliantly in Stephen Johnson's book. If you want the easy version, get Stephen Johnson's book. If you want the hard version, get Flynn's book.
I'll
But when
I'll
we're
read Johnson's first, and if that is too much, then I'll just stay away from Flynn's. Um,
so your
I
friends
this is
are a little bit loopy,
yeah, that's how it
and they're
goes.
repeating a cliche. And one of the things to really watch out for in your life is to know the difference between repeating a cliche and repeating something from actual observation.
Yeah,
Actual observation counts.
I've
It
uh
counts an awful lot.
I've noticed that it's very easy to say the thing that's expected of you and get the special Pavlovian doggy treat for doing so. It's a little bit more difficult to actually have your own thoughts on any given matter.
But
Beautifully,
back to finding a space, a position, and attention space,
uh-huh.
which is so important with those kids that with those children that Frank Sulloway was studying, so that the first child is the good child, and that takes up all the attention space in the middle of the stage. So you have to find a place in the wings somewhere to make a big fuss in order to get attention. Well, look at what YouTube is doing to attention space for people like you and me.
Mm,
It's giving us more recognition for being able to have original thoughts,
yeah,
which is making the space for original thoughts. It's growing it.
very true. Because I mean, up until the point where I started actually accruing an audience on YouTube, it was my belief that I was utterly alone in thinking the way that I do. And I still feel somewhat like that, but at least I feel like there's people out there who are at least interested in hearing my strange perspective on a, whatever I feel like talking about that day, whether it be something that's considered important or something that most people consider completely inconsequential. But this kind of segues really nicely into a question that a guy or maybe a girl named Tech Masters sent in, and their question is, I just wanted to know if Howard has any thoughts about how lazy we are all becoming and how so many people, especially in America, including me, are becoming fatter and fatter. Also, I want to know his point of view on how we can become a more healthy society, because healthiness doesn't only affect the physical part of the body, but also the mental and social part of us too. Since he has such a brilliant view on the energy crisis, I wanted to know what his view are on the health crisis.
Well, this is going to sound very weird, but I found this the most challenging of all the questions that came in. It really is a stumper. When it comes to a healthier America, for one thing, don't use your car. Now, when you've got to drive 150 miles, by all means use your car. Walking 150 miles is a terrible waste of time. Not to mention shoe leather, not to mention the fact that you're not in shape for it. And when it comes to taking the drive 11 to 17 miles into the city for your job, take your car. But when it comes to going to the grocery store, when it comes to doing anything that it involves a walk of less than 2 miles, forget the car for God's sake.
Okay,
Walk.
but I have to intervene here because
Yeah,
I live in Louisiana, where
yeah.
it is $1 million degrees outside through a sweltering swamp of humidity where you are constantly attacked by a barrage of mosquitoes, and nowhere except for New Orleans thinks that sidewalks are a necessity. So, and they don't even the
Oh, no
roads.
wonder they call Louisiana heaven.
They don't have.
Apparently it's the mosquitoes who call Louisiana heaven.
Yeah, it is. They love it here. So I mean, walking in Louisiana, at least during the summer, is not too fun. Especially, and it's never fun to walk in Louisiana because we don't
No,
have
wait, I have a
sidewalks, we don't have shoulders.
I have a clever remark.
Sure.
Everybody's going to hate me. It's not that clever, and that is, so you're telling me that the equivalent of going to Florida for an elderly Jewish person is going to Louisiana for a mosquito.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay.
that was
I
that
told you it
was.
wasn't very good. It wasn't very good.
It's actually kind of good in that it wasn't that good, but it transcends its not goodness by
Oh,
that
no.
the fact that
What
you
a
announced it
flattery
like
remark.
I
Okay.
have a clever remark.
Yeah, that's right.
All gather around me and hear the witty thing that I am going to say. Yeah,
Even though it's doltish. Okay,
not
good.
quite as witty as I originally
Back to
needed.
Louisiana. Okay, now I've been up against that. I was
But
very puzzled. When I used to go to Memphis or Atlanta. Well, Memphis really was, and Atlanta too. And with ZZ Top or one of my other groups or with the Jacksons. I'd get out of the hotel and I'd want to take a walk of a couple of miles, and I would discover that the city had done everything in its power to baffle me because it had covered the entire landscape with superhighways, 8-lane freeways with cars doing 65 miles an hour, and there wasn't a sidewalk or a safe crossing anywhere in sight. Is that the kind of thing that you're telling me is not just outside of a few hotels in Memphis and Atlanta, but
uh,
actually is?
I'm telling you that we have no sidewalk, we have no shoulder. You can walk on the road or you can wade through the ditch.
Yeah, or you can become roadkill.
Yeah,
Um,
basically.
okay, well, in theory, get out and walk to the local store. In practice, if you're stuck and you're stuck in the cage of a car, the car is a cage for your, every good
Buy just
back
buy a
to.
treadmill, all right?
Well, but that's not fun,
Put a TV
and
in front of it.
it's very hard to get. Well, for one thing, it really, really helps. There are a couple of modern things that really help if you're going to get exercise, and among those things are an iPod. So you look, I listen to books. I get so much reading done walking around and getting dressed in the morning and bathing and stuff like that, because I've got books on my Kindle, and the Kindle reads them out loud to you, for God's sakes.
Yeah,
You know the I
I have a Nook which doesn't do that, but it's
Oh,
still
well, the reason I got the Kindle is because it does do that,
it's
and
still
it's
good.
the it's
I don't do well with that. I don't know.
really
Isn't it like
listening to books.
robotic type voice? I don't know. I don't know. The pace that it's read to me always frustrates me because I want to read really fast, and then if someone's reading to me really slow, I'm like, come on, read faster.
But the Kindle, I hate to put in a plug for a commercial product, but this is really a neat commercial product, even though it doesn't look anywhere near as zippy as an iPad, and it won't get you the attention of all the girls in the coffee shop the way the iPad will. Still, the Kindle, you pick your own pace. It
Yeah,
has 4 different speeds for reading.
I wish I could have got that, but they don't sell it at Best Buy, so.
All you do is you send to Amazon, and Amazon just lowered the price to $189. At any rate, the point is that having interesting stuff coming in through your ears allows you to do all kinds of exercise, even treadmill type stuff. Yeah, if you have to set up a treadmill, TJ, I would never get the willpower to be able to stand there at a treadmill and just watch television. It would drive me nuts, but exercise is the answer, and exercise does another thing. Not only is exercise good for your body, exercise is good for your brain. Exercise actually, now look, the same guy who said that there can't possibly be a connection between sociality and biology, which is actually kind of crazy, but still would deny this. But walking and getting exercise increases the rate at which your brain works. and increases your clarity about things. So I'm just a huge, huge fan of walking. I mean, I get up in the morning. I used to dread doing push-ups, absolutely dreaded them, and as a consequence, didn't do them. And I tried to set aside a time of the day, and it was for me the end of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning to do my push-ups, and I never got them done. Never got them done. So I set aside a different time, which is first thing in the morning. As soon as I wake up, I go to the bathroom. I must confess that I go to the bathroom. Remember, observe all these little things that happen right under your nose, and you will find lessons for science, and for personal insight. And then go directly to the floor and do push-ups while listening to science podcasts. So I'm multitasking. Now that is not going to work for everybody, but I got up to 125 frigging push-ups 3 weeks ago, and I'm 67 frigging years old, for God's sakes. I'm a doddering little old man. So, I wish I could come up with a better answer than this, but exercise is really, really, really important, and it's important to your emotions. People who don't get enough exercise tend to be much more depressed. Or to put it differently, if you get a person out walking for 20 minutes to an hour a day, and that's in total, you don't have to do it all at once, you get a far less depressed person. And this fits into another thing that fits into how we operate as modules in a learning machine. In a learning machine, which modules, which microprocessors or little groups of microprocessors get the most juice and the most attention? It's the microprocessors that show that they have a handle on the problem by showing they have control. And control works the same way in human beings. When our body senses that we have control over something, it again boosts our perceptual system and boosts our immune system. Well, walking is something you can personally control. Driving cars is something you personally can control, and that's one of the things that's behind the enormous popularity for the last 100 years of cars.
As opposed to buses or
yeah, right,
trains.
exactly. Because once you get into traffic, there goes your sense of control. And that's why you get so frustrated. But the point is that walking gives you a sense of control, and one way or the other, it's good for your brain, it's good for your health, and this isn't bullshit. This isn't nonsense. This comes from study after study after study after study after study. When it comes to the complacency,
so
play
we
more.
have arrived at the controversial conclusion that exercise is good for you.
Yes, and I know the guy who says sociality can't possibly have anything to do with your biology. Say exercise can't possibly have anything to do with your biology either.
Let's read one of the I don't know, unless you don't want to.
No, I'm perfectly willing to go through the spam. I've been
let's read something mean.
Yes, let's read something.
I'm going to read this. I'm going to read something mean, and I'm going to read it in an appropriate.
Trounce up and down on Howard. Let's get our track shoes out, the ones with the great big spikes. Okay, are you ready, boys? Sharpen those spikes.
Okay, here we go. Howard Bloom is just out to stroke his bloated ego. If you actually listen to what he's saying, it's either common sense or complete bullshit. Sadly, everyone in here seems to jump to the conclusion that if someone can talk in a sophisticated manner, they are intelligent. That couldn't be further from the truth with this guy. I looked at his Twitter and almost gagged. Smug beyond belief.
Oh, I mean, it hurts. It really does hurt to get things like that. It hurts a lot. And I've been trying to puzzle this out because sometimes I feel that way about somebody. Right now, okay, there's this guy named Richard Dawkins, right? We keep bringing him up. He's written the leading intolerant atheist book of our time. And Richard Dawkins has had a tremendous influence on my life. His opening essay to The Selfish Gene was freaking brilliant. It said you've got to constantly take a look at things from unexpected points of view, and I think he was totally right on. And the concept of the selfish gene and the concept of the meme have been vital to the way I think. And yet I'm constantly rebelling against Richard Dawkins, and yet I'm constantly coming up with opinions of Richard Dawkins that are pretty much like the opinion this guy has of me, but aren't put in such harsh terminology. And what's the value of it? It's that differentiation thing again. If we were all the same, the collective intelligence of the society of which we're a part would be minimal. to say the least. But when we rebel against each other, and even when we have nasty opinions of each other, it helps give society options. It puts options, alternatives, different hypotheses into the collective brain. And sometimes it's this absolute uh, the thrill we get out of trashing somebody else that motivates us to take a new position. Einstein said something to the effect that all creative acts are acts of rebellion against somebody. And I find that in writing a book, you really need a straw man. You need a straw man to battle against. You need a straw man to fight. You need it in order to get your own emotions roused about the ideas that you're coming up with. And you need it to motivate your audience. I mean, and it's not just me, and it's not just the kind of books I write, books about ideas. Look at Star Wars. Star Wars sets you up in the very beginning with somebody to hate. First, he gives you people to love. You identify with Luke Skywalker and his lovable uncle and his lovable aunt, right?
Hmm.
Once they've given you a picture of that lovable uncle and lovable aunt and have bonded you to them, so you love them to death and you're prepared to spend the next hour and a half with them in the movie, then Luke Skywalker goes into town and guess what happens? The Star Troopers arrive and they flatten his uncle and aunt and the house that they're living in. And by the time Luke gets home, all you see is one pathetic, beseeching arm bone, totally blackened with the flesh burnt off of it, basically saying, "Luke, help!" And it's set up that way so you have somebody to loathe,
That
so
fucking
you have
empire!
somebody to just to hate.
How I
And now,
despise
look,
them and wish for their
right.
downfall.
And it isn't just George Lucas and me, you know? We're not on our own in this. Once upon a time, the British had theater, and really it wasn't going anywhere. It just wasn't drawing the crowds that it needed. And then somebody resurrected an idea from Rome called the Vengeance Play. And the basic plot of the Vengeance Play is Star Wars. You start in the beginning by identifying with a group of characters, and once you've identified with them, you make somebody do something so thoroughly despicable, loathsome, horrible, rotten, and mean that the audience wants to kill him for the rest of the play. And guess what? It packed the seats. It packed the seats. And who learned the art? I mean, who was hanging around London at this point as a neophyte in the theater business? A guy named Willie Shakespeare. And if you look at the structure of most of his plays, they're revenge stories, they're vengeance plots. So it's very useful for us human beings to have somebody to oppose. So useful that if a political leader doesn't have somebody to point at and say he's bad and horrible and demonic, the political leader doesn't get anywhere. How is the right managing to get as far as it's getting these days? It says Obama is a closet Marxist and he was trained in a madrasa, in a school for Islamic terrorists, and that he's secretly out to take over the United States for a giant Marxist plot. And the more they can demonize him, the more people come to the Tea Parties, and the more people support Sarah Palin, and the more votes the Republicans are sure they're going to get in the next election. And meanwhile, what do we do over on the Democratic side? Because I happen to be on the Democratic side of things. We do the same thing. George Bush was an absolute monster. How do we know that? Well, I personally absolutely know it. This guy's a part of much as it hurts me, and it does. It's a part of a frothy, rich process. And
Here's
he may someday come up with better ideas or at least interesting ideas that even I find interesting because he so much loathes mine.
yeah, I don't see him coming up with anything.
As
But
a
maybe
great
I'm wrong.
intellectual.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Here's a. I want to read the other troll comment to
Well,
you.
does that answer make any sense?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I mean,
You're humoring me, TJ.
no, I was just hoping that you would get angry and like be like, "Fuck that guy," you know.
Well,
But
now I have to tell you what TJ wrote me in an email when he sent me these questions beforehand and gave me a chance to ponder these. He said, "Howard, I'm going to give you the opportunity to tear him a new asshole."
you're not as vindictive as I am, I suppose. But here, maybe this other one will get you pissed. This is
Yes.
by
Maybe
uh,
there's okay. Let's see
Howard
if we can
Bloom.
fit.
Howard Bloom.
Yes.
The Stupidity of the Beast. A conventional revision of common sense through convoluted sentences by some guy in the music industry who has no real education on the subject by now.
Well, I mean, what are you going to say to something like that? I've been in the workforce since I was something like 20 years old when I was editing and writing for scientists and folks like that. And now I'm 67, so that means I've been in the workforce for 47 years. I spent a total of 15 years on my little field expedition into rock and roll. And 15 years out of 45, if my arithmetic is correct, I've spent approximately a third of my working life in the music business, and he says that I'm what does he say I am? A music business hack or something like that. At any
He
rate,
says
so
he says that you're in the music business and therefore cannot write a book about revising capitalism, I guess.
well, and I spent 50 years, over 52 years in science now. That's quite a long time, and I did a little field expedition, and it's true, it was in the music business. But the cranks are going to come up with this kind of thing. I particularly liked something I ran across 2 weeks ago. It was a review of my first book, The Lucifer Principle, and the guy said it was utter drivel, and 75% of it was about music. Guess what? It was about the music business. The music business wasn't in that book ever. Not in even one sentence. So sometimes people just write these things without paying attention to what they're reading. And, every one of us hates things. There are books I read that I think are utter drivel, too.
Like what,
So,
Howard? Let's start a
oh,
feud.
God. Oh, my
Let's
God.
start a battle
Well,
between you and someone else.
the person I really like to fight with is Richard Dawkins because I agree with him on so many things. But this is what Freud called the narcissism of minor differences. You really or Emil Durkheim, who was one of the founders of sociology, said if you take 12 saints and you put them on the same cloud for long enough, they will pick sides and they will quibble about who has the most dust on his cloak. And, six saints will go over to one side because they'll be the dusty ones because they've got one piece of dust on their cloak, the dirty ones. And then there will be the real clean ones who don't even have one piece of dust. And they'll practically kill each other over one piece of dust on your coat. And that's the way humans are. And it's a very, very productive process if it's not taken to extremes. Any good thing in overdose is a poison. We take it to extremes when we make world wars over this kind of stupidity. But a certain amount of this kind of contingent stupidity is very valuable.
Do you think we'll ever have another world war, Howard?
Yes, and it scares the shit out of me. I mean, really, with nuclear weapons and all that stuff, um, life is going to survive. We know that there are bacterial forms, they're called radiodurans, that are already up to the job. They're living in radioactive cooling pools. They've worked out a system to keep their genes intact, despite the fact that their genes are being knocked around like billiard balls by passing radioactive particles. Um,
That's a pretty cold comfort. Like, yeah, we'll all be destroyed, but the radiodurans, they'll be cool.
Well, I want humans to survive, and in the Lucifer Principle, the reason that I was so into populating space and putting colonies up in space, I didn't know as much as I do now about all the things that can happen because of our spreading out into space. But what I realized was, holy moly, one way or the other, we're going to hit a third world war. It's just we're not bright enough to figure out our way out of war yet. We've come nowhere near being able to figure out our way out of war. In fact, figuring out our way out of war is like figuring out for the person who's concerned about complacency and concerned about how fat we're getting. It's like imposing an entire discipline that we don't even understand how to create,
I just
much
wonder.
self-discipline ourselves
One thing
into.
I was actually thinking about last night was like I wonder, like, let's say we terraform the moon and we colonize. I just wonder how long it's going to be before like the moon declares war on the Earth.
Oh, it'll happen. But the more it'll happen, but the more planets there are, the more moons, the more asteroids, the more solar systems, um, the more solid life's ability to continue into the future will be. A world war right now would be terrible because there's only one world that we humans are on, or that life is on, to the best of our knowledge. But put us on six different worlds, and one world war won't matter. That I mean, it'll matter. You don't want people to die. You don't want one person to die, much less 100,000 or 100 million people or a billion people to die. But at least the human race, will have an easier time carrying on, and life will have an easier time carrying on. We will have covered our bets.
All right. Well, since we're kind of getting into the space thing, we have one more non-space related question, and then three that are space related. Howard, this is from member 2798. Howard, in your book, you say.
Wait, let's change the title, or let's change the opening of this, and use a really terrific opening that Saturday Night Live used to use. Okay, Howard, you ignorant slut. How's that?
That's good too, I guess. That was kind
Okay.
of random, but all right.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
in your book, you say it's a capitalist job to benefit others based on morality, but how do we enforce that? It
That's
seems
a.
that some of
Oh,
the most successful CEOs are complete psychopaths. Of
I,
course, capitalism is good, but how do we make the people on top, especially in the banking business, actually care about their customers?
this is a really good question now, because it's not easy. First of all, what I found in my, I did 20 years of field work in the corporate world. The 15 years in the music business was a part of that 20 years, and and what I discovered or seemed to discover during that time is, remember, I was ridiculously successful. I wasn't successful at making money for myself because that's not what I was interested in. I was interested in the insight. For me, insight is pay. I mean, it's pay dirt. It's real. It's terrific. It's wonderful stuff. But what I discovered is I was able to make lots and lots of money for my clients by not giving a shit about the money, TJ, by caring about the clients, by caring about the people who cared about the clients, by caring about other human beings. And the more I could deliver to those other human beings, it was really remarkable. The more money came in. And that's the essential equation in capitalism. If you fuck over your audience, if you fuck over your customers all the time, eventually you're not going to have any customers. Fucking over the world the way that BP has fucked over the world has lost BP tens of billions of dollars in value. I don't know the exact figure, but it's way up there in just a matter of 2.5 months or less, or maybe a month and a half. I haven't been following the chronology of the BP story, but it has lost big time. And the CEO who was CEO when all of this happened, everybody knows he's in an ejection seat. Now it's true that he's in an ejection seat with a golden parachute. And that's one of the loony things right now that's going on in capitalism. The current robber barons, you know the concept of a robber baron? The original idea, the metaphor, came from the idea that back in the Middle Ages, if there was a road going through your domain and you were the lord of that domain, you could set yourself up on the road and just ask for whatever you wanted from people going through. And so long as it was still profitable and worthwhile for people to go through, they'd have to pay you whatever it was you were asking. Of course, you were controlled by the fact that if you asked too much, nobody would come on that road anymore. Well, in the 1920s, a book was written about the 1890s, and the phrase robber barons was used for the first time. Robber barons are those who, again, are able to set up a trap across the road that everybody has to use, and they're able to pound the hell out of you for money. And that's what CEOs have been doing with American society in particular. Because if you look at the CEO structure, the pay structure for CEOs in Europe, it's much lower than it is here. Now, CEOs in China, if they're entrepreneurial CEOs, are able to make a fortune. But to be an entrepreneurial CEO, you can't just take over a big existing company that's been around for 120 years, the way that BP has been around. You have to really start a company that other people whose goods other people want and need. Well, again, because of the robber baron thing, CEOs have been giving themselves salaries roughly between $14 million and $45 million a year. That's absolutely outrageous. You can buy an entire, and this is not a joke, you can buy an entire small town, all of its real estate, for that annual salary. It is grotesque. So we have to, I think Obama is right, and my friends on the right absolutely disagree with me about this, but he's put a pay czar in charge of trying to moderate these salaries somewhat. But again, these people have to realize, the people running companies have to realize, if they don't give a shit about other human beings, they may not be destroying the company's short-term value, but they're going to destroy its long-term value. Eventually, people are going to not want to have anything to do with that company whatsoever. And some of these companies that create really big problems, like BP has, there's a company that used to be one of the main companies. It was National Gypsum or something like that, up in Buffalo, New York, my hometown. And they were involved with an incredible environmental catastrophe, and the result was they went out of business. So there are punishments in the capitalist system, but we do have to criminalize the criminal acts. And the bankers, that's a whole different matter. Because one of the things we have to recognize is we know not what we do. In other words, some of the most important things that we do we think are absolutely grotesque and absurd, like playing video games. Now, let me go back to video games for a second. We think that games are an utterly useless waste of time. And certainly, if you don't feel that way about the games you play, your parents sure do. And if you're a parent of kids, you sure feel that way about your kids' video games. Well, once upon a time, there was this really, really big problem in chemistry. People were beginning to sense that there was some peculiar kind of relationship between the elements, the atoms that they were beginning to discover, and they couldn't figure out for the life of them what the hell the relationship was. And they tried everything they could think of, and it still didn't become clear. Well, one of them was a really big time waster. I mean, his parents, you can imagine what his parents must have thought of him, because he sat around playing a game so useless you don't even play it with another human being. It's called solitaire. It was based on the technology of the time, printing. Printing a bunch of cards and standardizing the cards. Well, one day it occurred to him that if he laid out all of these elements the way he laid out a game of solitaire, all of a sudden the elements made sense. His name was Mendeleev, and this thing he came up with based on solitaire is the atomic table that we've been using ever since. It's absolutely indispensable to physics and mathematics. Games are our way of practicing for the future. They're our way of practicing for futures we don't even imagine. And some of the most useless and trivial and vain things that we do are our ways of practicing for unforeseen futures that are just around the corner. So it's a big mistake for us to try to prejudge what's of value and what's not of value in a capitalist economy, and yet somehow we have to rein in the guys who are simply raking off too much fat for themselves.
I just wonder how many teenagers are going to save that little audio clip and play it for their parents and be like, see, I'm being productive.
Right. Yes, I hope they do, because this multitasking, we talked about the bullshit about how multitasking is dumbing down people. It's an absurd idea, but we did that last week, didn't we?
Yeah, and the really sad thing was that quite a few people didn't realize that you were being sarcastic.
Well, I wasn't being sarcastic.
No, you were being sarcastic when you were calling people dummies for not being able to memorize the Iliad and the Odyssey.
They didn't realize that. Oh my God! Oh, poor babies. We'll have to.
Yeah, well, they were in the dumb minority, so whatever.
Yeah. Oh well, we have to uplift even the dumb. Well, if ideally we were going to achieve everything that we wanted to achieve in life, one of the things we'd achieve is taking advantage of the brains of those who right now are not using their brains very well, because they got brains and they got curiosity, and it's just a matter of waking it up.
Yeah, I have 3 space-related questions here.
Okay.
And this one is from Van Mojo 23. Question: while I totally agree with Howard's idea for space-based solar power, I have trouble believing that our politicians would have enough courage to back an idea so radical. Considering the public's reaction to the economic stimulus and healthcare reform, how would you convince politicians to stand behind this?
Okay, now, part of the answer lies in another one of the questions. Remember that question by the guy who said, doesn't Howard realize that there is no space program anymore, that we've only got 2 more
I can read that one if you want to.
Yeah, read that one.
This is Valhalla 56. I hate to break it to Howard, but the U.S. program is almost dead. 1 or 2 more shuttle launches. Obama and Congress has cut funding for NASA. In a couple of years, NASA will be an agency that sends a few Americans up in Russian, Chinese, or Indian space flights. Maybe Howard hasn't been keeping up with current affairs.
Okay, the answer to question number 1, how in the world do we motivate politicians to actually implement this plan, is in question number 2. Okay, question number 2 says, among other things, that Obama has cut the budget for the space program. That's wrong. Obama has suggested an additional $6 billion for the space program, which no one suspected could possibly happen, because Obama had indicated during his campaign that he wasn't into space, he would rather put money into education, and because we have to slim down the budget for everything now that we're running a massive deficit. So the fact is wrong. Obama has, against all the odds, Obama has increased the money for the space program. It is absolutely true that we are about to retire the shuttles. And this is going to be disastrous for America because for somewhere between 5 and 10 years, we are not going to have access to space through an American vehicle. In other words, Americans are not going to be able to fly into space. But guess whose fault that is? It's not Obama. It's the fault of a guy named Bush. And remember, I'm a Democrat, so I think Bush was an insane idiot. And he put together an insane idiot space program called the Vision for Space Exploration. And at the center of that program is this giant rocket called the Ares that nobody I know in the space community believes is going to work. But guess what it does do? It gobbles up money like crazy. It gobbles up so much money that it sucks all the oxygen in the room and there's no money left for anything else in NASA. But because it is a $60 billion boondoggle, and that boondoggle goes directly to companies like Northrop Grumman. Companies like Northrop Grumman have been willing to spend a few $1,000,000 to give you the impression that President Obama is taking money away from the space program, not putting money into the space program, to give you the impression that President Obama is the one responsible for the fact that we are going to go without American manned access to space, not President Dumbbell Bush. And they've so successfully gotten this across that if you read question number 2 again, you will see that questioner number 2 has swallowed every bit of this hokum because that is what $1 million in a publicity campaign can buy you when you're trying to save a $60 billion boondoggle. In other words, the answer to question number 1, how do we get politicians off their ass to give us the future so we can lead the world into the future, which we need to do so we can elevate the standard of living in every continent on this planet, including the distant parts of Asia and the distant parts of Africa, which is something that space-based solar power can do. So we can lift economies in ways people have never seen before, which is what opening colonies in space is going to do, which is what mining asteroids that have between $1 trillion and $17 trillion worth of raw materials is going to do for us. How do we get politicians to do that? By putting the kind of $1 million budget into changing public perceptions that has been put into buffaloing poor questioner number 2 who has got it all wrong. But he's not the only one. Everybody has got it all wrong because that's what a publicity budget can buy you. We need a publicity budget for the truth. We need a publicity budget for the American future. We really, really do. And if I sound like I'm passionate about this, it's because I am.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I guess we'll just this is a question from a person named Bush in 08, which
Bush?
Yeah, Bush in 08.
Yeah, okay.
Third term. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm hoping that's just meant to be inflammatory. But
right.
This is
It's either that or he's terribly obsessed with pubic hair.
Yeah, maybe that's true. Let's hope that's the case because that's a lot less repugnant. What resources could possibly be useful from space? They would have to be valuable enough to transport millions of miles through the solar system at least, which would cost millions of dollars per pound of whatever we get. So I don't know where he's...
Oh, well, I was hoping you would ask that one. He's now, look, I'm not a technical expert on space. I spend an awful lot of my time with technical experts on space, but I am not a technical expert. But nonetheless, let me give you what I seem to know, or think I know, or hope I know. And that is the expensive part is a little 8-minute ride. It's really expensive. It's getting out of what's called the gravity well. It's that little 8-minute ride from Cape Canaveral to space. Once you're up there, getting around is very inexpensive. It takes huge amounts of fuel to get away from the gravity of the Earth and get into orbit. But once you are in orbit, you can get anywhere on almost no fuel at all. In fact, want to take your fuel from the sun and put it into an ion engine? You can shuttle around at no cost for a long, long time. Yeah, you have cost in putting your stuff up there, but once it's up there, hey, it's very easy to maintain. It does not cost a lot of money. It doesn't take a lot of fuel. So fly to your local asteroid, put a bunch of ion rockets on it, or they're not rockets, ion engines that get their energy from the sun and shuttle it wherever the hell you want, as long as you don't have to get it out of a gravitational well. And then how do you get things to Earth? You have, now one of my friends in the space community seem to have realized this, you have something working in your favor called gravity. Once you get things into the snatch of gravity, gravity just pulls them down to the earth. And we have, I mean, you could use the stupidest technologies. We call them parachutes and land the stuff in the ocean someplace and pick it up. And the stuff that's up there includes all the stuff we need for the batteries that we need for electric cars. And we're going to need this stuff by the hundreds of thousands of tons. We're going to need lithium. We're going to need rare earth minerals. We're going to need, and then for all the electronics, we're going to need things like germanium and platinum. And all that stuff is up there. And getting it down isn't hard. It's simply getting up so that once we're up there, we can shuttle around with ease. Does that make any sense?
Makes sense to me. Hope it makes sense to them. I have nothing left to ask, but you need to
Right?
go ahead and quickly plug for more questions, because we always need that.
Okay, we want more questions, and we want you to buy The Genius of the Beast, a radical revision of capitalism at your local bookstore. Ask for it by name.
That was so corny, but I think it might work. Um,
We feed off your question. I mean, we really do. Look how much fun I have, even with the negative questions. It's
yeah, I'm gonna get one of those that actually pisses you off at some point. I'm gonna chew through that happy disposition of yours. I'm gonna
Oh,
corrode it with the
I'm the
acid of some
funniest person on the planet, TJ.
troll's
Uh,
negative
I spent
energy.
40 years in clinical depression, for God's sakes. How could I be cheerful?
I don't know. You have that manic sort of cheerfulness, like you're like
It's the interchange of energy between the two of us, my boy. Um, that's what it is.
that
Just
that that Joker personality.
Yeah, I'm sure that when Johnny Carson walked off the stage and Ed McMahon went back home, Johnny Carson was probably a mean, lousy son of a bitch who was depressed about everything and kicked children on his way home.
I like that Johnny Carson. I actually like that one better. Um, all right. Well, I guess that we'll just wait for more questions then.